welcome to the Economic Times exclusive series of conversations being hosted with senior leadership of India Inc. As part of this premium series, I, Gaurav Mehndiratta, am in conversation with Mr. Jetendra Gavankar, Managing Director, Safran Helicopters Engines India. And the purpose of today's discussion is to see how the Indian aerospace and defense ecosystem shall evolve in 2022 and beyond. Mr. Gavankar is an accomplished aerospace professional with a proven track record of 30 years in strategy and business development. Prior to joining Safran, he has had successful stints at Honeywell and Adani Group. Mr. Gavankar has also served at the Indian Air Force and DRDO. Very rare combination, sir, of having someone served in the forces, DRDO, as well as Indian and foreign conglomerates. Just to set the context, in India, the aerospace and defense industry is growing significantly with rising activities, both on the civil aviation side as well as on the defense side. On the civil aviation side, while the increased demand is on account of large aircraft from Indian carriers and focus on powered by our contracts, and on the other side, on the defense side, there is a lot of demand from the forces for advanced infrastructure, and then the government thrust of actually modernizing the armed forces. So the A&D market is projected to reach close to 70 billion by 2030. And on top of that, the Indian government has also set an ambitious target of achieving exports to up to the extent of 35,000 crores, which is close to 25 billion by 2025, in line with the Atmanirbhar Bharat initiative. Major steps in that direction were taken during the policy changes which are announced in the last 18 months, which include increase in foreign direct investment from 49% to 74% under the automatic route, as well as reforms like strategic partnership to encourage greater participation in the defense sector, introduction of categories like buy and global manufacture in India, and very many other important changes in the defense acquisition procedure 2020. So my question to you, sir, is what are your views on these recent policy changes, specifically around Make in India that we talked about? Are these progressive for the industry, and especially from a foreign OEMs context, where do you see things shaping up?
Yeah, Gaurav, thanks for the introduction and the question, which is so very apt in today's context. I have not seen in my 30 plus years of work in this sector this much of push and this much of support from government in the past. Specifically, I will not say it is, though it stands that specifically it's for private sector to come in and support the domain, but it is also to push the government agencies like DPSUs and DRDOs to deliver more and deliver the relevant thing which the forces need, because there was always a disconnect between our R&D and the forces need. I think slowly and steadily we are now reaching a space where the US defense companies were there a couple of decades ago, where their armed forces and industry are so well integrated. I mean, to the extent of companies like Lockheed Martin having a lot of ex-defense and current defense guys working in the company, and some Lockheed Martin guys working with the armed forces on the development program. So that kind of ecosystem will take some time in India, because inherent trust on both sides and inherent need to use each other's expertise would have to be understood first. That is one thing which I think the other stakeholders other than government needs to build, that the government cannot do much about it. Having said that, the Make in India push, which started in 2014 with PM Modi giving that call from the ramparts of Red Fort, I think there is nothing wrong or right about that policy. Today, not only India, the same thing has been adopted at Europe under called Come Let's Make Europe Great Again. It's been done by UK called Make UK, and China says some made in China 2025. So every country has this policy, and we have our own thing. So what options do the country have if you want to achieve their sovereignty specifically with reference to defense manufacturing. R&D is another issue that I'll come to later if there is a question. But there are only three options with us. One, we import because defense cannot be ignored. We need equipments. Forces need support. Otherwise, they cannot defend the borders. So we import, or we collaborate, or we develop. Now, import is what we don't want. Develop is everything cannot be done. It's a little far off. It's a long-term strategy. But what we can do right now is more on collaborate. So this is where your question actually focuses on. So if you collaborate, whom do you collaborate with? So obviously you collaborate somebody who is outside your borders. The foreign OEMs come in there. But these have to be from friendly nations, because this is something which rides on the diplomacy, rides on the friendly relationship and long-term partnerships which India has. So I would not name any nation specifically here, but there are enough and more nations who have such technologies and are willing to share with India. I think that needs to be exploited to develop this field further. Just to give you a small example, and not because I'm working with Safran right now, but this company has been here in India for about close to 6 decades now. And in the recent visit of the French defense minister, and if you are following that and others who are tracking it, I think enough and more clear message was given that they would support the Make in India in whichever way they can. And so these kind of collaborative approaches, I think, would help in the short term for the country to develop the sovereignty into the defense side, Make in India to happen, FDI to come in, our strategic partnership models to actually fructify, because the policy is there on the paper for so long, but action on ground is a little bit delayed. So this is my opinion that this is how we should go about it as a country who wants to have self-sufficiency, self-reliance in the defense domain.
Mr. Gavankar, and I really liked one point that you made, that it is not only about bringing in private enterprise in, but also increasing the efficiencies of DPSUs. And the whole OFB corporatization is one step in that direction as well. So I guess, you know, the mantra is clear that it's going to be Make in India, and the government's actually going on all cylinders to say everything needs to fire, not only private investment, foreign investors, but actually you also need the DPSUs to start firing more than they've been doing in the past. Fantastic. So my second question actually is that, the DAP talks about self-reliance in design, development, and, the new categories like IDDM have come in. But governments also actually looked at for the first time, reserved certain items for which cannot be imported, 209 defense items, and then also an indigenization list with close to 2,500 items of sub-assemblies and assemblies. Now, what are your thoughts on this list? Is it something that was already being manufactured in India, and how quickly do you think the Indian companies or the DPSUs and others can come to the curve? And do you see it as an entry barrier for foreign OEMs?
This is the most debated topic in the industry right now. I'll take it in two parts, Gaurav. The first part is, how good is this negative list or positive list, whichever way you want to call it. I think, yes, it's a positive way of going about things. This list per se, I don't want to comment, because there are items which are already indigenized in the list, and those are not very high value, high technology items. So do we really want to, if our aim is to save foreign exchange, yes, the list is very good. But if our aim is to develop niche technologies and be market leaders in some of them world over, maybe a decade from now, then I think the approach has to be little more or much more than this right now. So negative list is a good thing. I'm not negating it, but this is not the only thing which will make it achieve. So it's probably maybe a 20% contribution to overall aim. I think what actually could do, the second part was, say, if companies can understand the need of armed forces, put in some money to do the R&D on around that, which policies like IDEX is trying to do to a limited extent. Yes, see, academia industry collaboration is another thing which can make this achieved, because it's a low cost option to involve academia. Industry could support and fund it. And if you have been tracking, there are some examples like Air Force did recently this drone competition called Meher Baba competition. It was purely an academia industry team. So they wanted academia to be mandatory part of that competition, and they have successfully delivered. So more such examples would probably make. So what they are doing is, here they are not trying to do a seal or a o-ring or some metal parts or some component, but what they're doing is they are trying to build around the concept which the armed forces want to implement in future. And this is where I was saying that if you want to be market leaders and world drivers on certain technologies, such kind of approach is needed. Another example I can quote here is a company called Idea Forge, IIT Mumbai incubated startup. Of course, it's beyond startup now, but they have been able to successfully understand the Army needs. Recently, they got some orders from Army. Navy has given one such order for another startup. So those kind of approaches would probably contribute to about 50% of our end goal. So yes, positive list is good. Much more is needed. And the last part of your question is, what is the foreign OEM going to think about it, or what does it affect? So I mean, each foreign OEM has its own strategy around India. So it is not that one is wanting to do here, one doesn't want to do here. If there are enough and more opportunities, foreign OEMs would do business in India. I have no doubts on that. Safran, for once, we have 7 entities in the country today. So, and the 8th one we are setting up in Goa. That's the helicopter engine MRO as a joint venture with HAL. And we have another company already a joint venture with HAL. We do a lot of sourcing from India for our global supply chain. So all this is not because Make in India came, or we had to be forced by government. So the company had a strategy around India for long term. So last 60 years presence here is not a short duration. So I think foreign OEMs would come, stay, because it's a collaborative world in any case. World over, companies do collaborate across countries to make a product and sell it globally. I think that will fall in place, so we don't have to really worry.
Okay, and I think, and fantastic points there as well. And this leads me to my next question, which is in terms of, there are the capability gaps in terms of critical technologies which are deterrent to our self-reliance index in defense manufacturing today. Defense Ministry has been taking a lot of initiatives, and you talked about some like IDEX, but what is the key role that foreign OEMs can play in this process, specifically if we were to look at foreign OEMs?
So to understand your question, you are saying what is the role foreign OEMs can play to help the cause of Make in India?
Yes, and specifically in terms of the capability gaps which exist in relation to critical technologies. Now, how can they support this whole cause?
Okay. The question here is relevant to the technologies which are not available in the country. Then obviously it comes from a standpoint of, is the country to which the foreign OEM belongs, are they willing to permit? Because the defense technologies are very, very sovereign in nature, and unless the government of the day in that country is willing to allow those technologies to be exported, and US has been putting so many technologies under scanner, saying that this cannot go out of US, and Russia has a different way of handling the same thing. Israel has its own policies around that, and so is France and UK and others. So first and foremost thing is, if we have a good G2G relationship and a dialogue at that level, which can at least open up the doors for the foreign OEMs to come and offer those technologies. I don't see a reason why it cannot be offered. In fact, if you don't consider it as why I'm going back to Safran again, obviously because I have been dealing with that right now. We are committed. I mean, I will not say my words, the Florent Parly's word, our French defense minister's words, where we are committed to make in India and integrate Indian defense manufacturers into global supply chain. So if that comes at a government level and the two parties sit together and say, okay, I have this ABCDE and I would work with the French companies to bring those technologies in India, I don't see why it should not happen. In fact, I can give you another example. In 2019, Government of India did a similar pact with the with the Russian government. Defense Minister himself had traveled to Moscow, and I was part of the delegation then. The point was that there are a lot of Russian equipments which are not getting supported. They are obsolete, and Indian armed forces are finding difficulties. So the government wanted the Russian companies come and do a tie-up in India and set up those MRO or manufacturing facilities so that we transfer the technology as well as maintain the technology. Some movement did happen on that, not to the extent I expected, but that is the kind of, I think, tie-ups which would help to get the niche technologies. Otherwise, supplying into a global supply chain, I think Indian private industry is already doing it. Many and more have 80% plus revenues in defense and aerospace coming because of global supply chain and not because of Indian orders. So I see your question in that context. I think the best way for Government of India to get foreign OEMs interested is to open that door, which allows them to come and do business in India.
No, I completely agree with you. And I think this industry is one where the regulator, where the customer, where the seller, I mean, more or less it's the government, right, on both the sides. So it has to be, and you talked about this in the, the earlier part of the discussion, that it has to be friendly country, and India really needs to actually up the game, if at all. And you gave examples of France, Russia, DTTI is another thing from the US, which has been working for a while. So I think more and more such collaborations could actually result in a better outcome rather than the OEMs themselves trying to connect, because it has to be a sponsorship from the governments as well to allow critical technologies to move out of their lands. And just shifting gears into startups, that's an interesting space with space also opening up, defense opening up. What role do you see startups playing in this? And there are some examples already that you have witnessed. We'd like to hear that from you as well.
Yeah, so this is an interesting field, space startups. About 4 or 5 years ago, is first time I heard that ISRO is planning to bring private industry into satellite launch. And to be very frank and truthful, I was not really confident. I thought it's and as they say, right, it's a rocket science. So if it's a rocket science, then it has to be with the rocket scientists. So, but over this years, I've seen companies like Agnicool, Skyroot, these kind of firms have proven me and many like me wrong. They have gone ahead and set up launch vehicles. I think one of them, Skyroot, I think is planning to launch this year. So in 5 years, from setting up to launching, is actually we are building some of the companies which we talk about very proudly world over, SpaceX and Blue Origin or Virgin. These Agnicool and Skyroots are Indian equivalent, and maybe they would become as big as them in coming decade. I really see a lot of potential. Not only launch vehicle, like companies like Pixel. Pixel is planning for some 300 Earth orbiting satellite constellation over India. Then Dhruv is making some. So there are enough and more doing in this space. I think the potential is also very high. So right now about $7-8 billion is what is the market size, expected to go to about $50-55 billion by 2025. So I think there is space for everybody to come and contribute there specifically in the space segment, you're saying.
Yeah. No, and we are, exactly what we are also witnessing, not only in the space sector, slowly and gradually, even in the aerospace and defense sector, you seeing a lot of these startups, mushrooming in certain parts of the country, and hopefully they will take the lead in changing the game, so as to private, participation in the sectors being concerned, like some of the other fields where startups have actually completely taken over. Now, completely on a different question. Now, what we understand is that Safran is committed to making air transport safer and more environmentally friendly, and also tackling the climate change and achieving carbon neutral aviation by 2050. And it has also doubled its efforts on technology innovation when it comes to developing energy solutions for various ranges of aircrafts, and use of biofuels and new architecture. Now, could you provide some more guidance as to how would this be relevant from an Indian subcontinent standpoint?
Yeah. Before I come to Indian standpoint, we need to understand one. Safran, of course, has been an industry leader in propulsion there is no two way about it. So last 50 years plus, the constant endeavor has been not only to build engines, but to build the fuel burn low and reduce the carbon emissions to about 50%. And the target right now the company has is to take it to about 50% more by 2030. So having said that, there are certain background work or certain strategic thinking around which the company is working. So the three pillars I could call is, one is to make more frugal gas turbines, so which could probably give me lower carbon emissions, high efficiency engines. So example could be one engine which we are working was Arano, which got certified in 2019. It gives me about a 15% less fuel burn compared to contemporary engines. The second strategy around which we are working is going electric hybrid. So in that technology, basically what we call it as an eco mode technology, where we have electric and conventional combustion going on, but in a twin engine helicopter during the cruise mode, we can switch off one engine and use the electric power to sustain that. Or even in a single engine helicopter, we could build in a little more of safety, because if a single engine fails, we still have an electric option available. And all of this actually reduces carbon emission by about 20 to 30%. So that is the second strategy around which we are developing. A lot of work is right now going on that. The third one, which is kind of a low-hanging fruit for everybody, including Safran, is use of sustainable aviation fuel, what in common parlance we call it as biofuels. So that is where India is also trying to promote more of biofuels. You must have heard recently SpiceJet doing one flight, and Indian Air Force doing some flights on those. So what we have done is, first of all, we have gone ahead and certified all our helicopter engines for 50% blend of sustainable aviation fuel. So all my operators can actually use 50% blended SAF. And the ultimate aim is to go to 100% biofuel, for which we are working on one engine called Makila 2 with Airbus very closely, and on a platform called H225. So similarly, there is another engine on Anito, which we are working with Leonardo very closely. So those kind of trials and flight tests would eventually in a coming year or two would prove it that we could use 100% biofuels, and that probably will give me a huge reduction in the carbon dioxide footprint, ultimately leading to a better sky. We have other commitments. India is also committed to reducing the carbon footprint. So there are enough and more examples which are happening in Safran per se, but since your question is how does it help India? So now coming to most of the helicopters flying in India, I'm talking helicopters because I deal with them, are with Safran engines. In fact, 100% of the military helicopters are with Safran engines. So if we bring in this blended fuel and hybrid electric in coming years, I think we would be able to contribute in a big way from an aviation standpoint. We also have our CFM engines flying, which could bring in these technologies in the civil aviation side. So I think there is enough and more we can do. We already have started talking to HAL on options of how do we bring this on table for HAL to implement along with us. So these are few of our contributions to the Indian ecosystem on the sustainable aviation.
Thank you. And is this connected with the European research program Clean Sky? And if you could shed light on that.
Yeah, I mean, yes. It is definitely connected to European Clean Sky. But in Clean Sky, there are some technology demonstrator programs are also going. We are developing about 8 European countries, about 20 partners together. We are making one turboprop engine, which is based on an core of an engine called RD10. So this one is going to give me probably about a 15-20% low fuel burn and again carbon reduction. We are the first one to enter into a test phase under this program of Clean Sky 2. And this solution could go into military, general aviation, regional aviation, anywhere. So maybe that is another thing, like India has turboprop, something like Dornier, we could offer this engine. And Dornier is going to be a big way integrated into the regional connectivity scheme. That's the plan government of India has. It's a Make in India aircraft for smaller airports. So we could probably look at contributing towards that for India per se. So yeah, Clean Sky, we are a big partner.
And I think, and as it's all linking in, because, what we could see in policy making going ahead into the future, that this ESG, a larger ESG initiative will form part of the government policies in a much larger way. And just one question, I think we discussed this for a bit. Now we discussed the initial part of the discussion around Make in India. You talked about your 7 entities in India and the 8th one coming up. Any specific examples of how Safran or any programs that Safran is undertaking, which could be, in line with some of the recent policy changes and could bring in significant amount of investments or technology into India? Something you want to talk
about? See, I can probably talk about things which are already into the open domain. Let me start with, if I understand your question correctly, what you're trying to understand is what is the future plan which Safran has for India?
India, specifically in context of Make in India.
Yeah. So the first and foremost thing which is already on the plate and on the ground work is happening is setting up an helicopter engine MRO facility, which will be a world-class facility set up by Safran in collaboration with HAL in Goa, which is a delayed project because of COVID. We had to probably had a halt of about 2 years, but now we are back into the thing. Both companies are putting all their efforts to go ahead and set it up. This will be the first engine MRO agency in the country. So other than what Government of India owns as virtue of Russian engine overhauls, which Air Force manages or sometimes HAL manages. So outside that context, will be the first attempt by the industry to set up an engine MRO in the country. Engine being a very focused area, I think Government of India has a big push around that. In fact, the last Aero India theme was aero engines.
Yes.
So if you're going by that and going by what was offered by the French defense minister to the Indian defense minister about collaborating on the engine technologies by both countries, I foresee that we would be doing something substantial in this field if both sides sit down and work out the framework of how to go about doing it. Other than that, we have a heavy sourcing opportunity from India. 2 of our companies do manufacture a lot of components, parts, wire harnesses, software we develop in India. So that base has to be expanded, will be expanded. We are already hiring in all of those domains in India. So I see more and more of sourcing happening from India for our global supply chain, HEMRO happening, engine related R&D development work happening going forward. I think these are some of the big tickets. And of course, we continue to support our esteemed customer, the Indian Armed Forces and HAL, on all the work which needs to be done to maintain, manage these engines, because as you know, defense platforms are meant for a 40-50 year period. So it takes a separate and an independent effort to sustain that. So we continue doing that.
No, I mean, this is a fantastic story because engines are the most critical part and the most difficult part to move from their host nations out, and starting with an MRO and doing other bits of R&D and also sourcing could one day lead to that significant base in India in terms of the engine manufacturing. Now, my last question.
One thing I want to just bring it in here, if you permit me, is we are Safran is the only company which has done a co-development of engine with HAL. So HAL's engine called Shakti, which powers all the platforms today, LH, LCH, LUH. So this Shakti is a co-development effort between Safran and HAL. It's been more than a decade that each engine we have worked, like LUH now, last 10 years we are working together. And HAL is self-sufficient in productionizing it, in maintaining it. So that is the kind of collaborative effort I was mentioning some time back when we were asking. So foreign OEMs need not just come to sell, they can come to collaborate. And that is the message which Government of India wants to hear, I think, and that is what Safran has been doing for so long. Fantastic again.
And I just considering the time, one last question to you, and budget's around the corner, less than a week away. And, last time we saw, while the budget outlay was flat, but the capital outlay had increased by 19%. Where do you see that going? Just any thoughts around that? And also, do you see any further policy announcements coming as part of the budget?
To be very frank, if you look at the budget from a larger perspective, the government, Nirmalaji's aim would be to keep the fiscal deficit under control, though they have a record tax mop-up in the first 9 months, but still. COVID takeaways, high interest on the loans and welfare measures, job creation, PLIs, there are so many and more which she has to address. So, to be very frank, I don't know what is planned for defense budget this year, but I feel it will remain largely flat. I don't see any major upheavals seen there. I would be, being ex-armed forces guy myself, I can say that the armed forces would be happy if the inflation gets covered with the budget and maybe a 3 to 5% growth on the not last year's BE, but last year's expenditure side. If that is given, because Gaurav, most of this goes into capital outlay, goes into committed liabilities. So very hardly much is. So unless you have a 5% growth, you won't be able to really look at new programs coming in. So yes, I want it to happen this way, but I'm not sure if that's that much of space the finance minister has.
Just one more last question. PLI in defense, you did talk about this. We've seen PLI in 13 sectors. Last one was on drones. Do you see that coming in towards aerospace and defense? Are you hearing something like that?
No, I think it should come because finally it is also a manufacturing sector, right? Either you give me PLI in manufacturing side or you give me incentives on the R&D side. So if you give me neither and you expect me means I'm talking about the defense industry in India, to run a marathon, it would be difficult. So some or other support is definitely needed. Some good ideas have come up in the last 4 years. I'm not saying that those are not helping. Yes, they have given enough a boost. People are who used to have very, very negative views of this industry's growth and profit lines and bottom lines have slowly changing. So I think a PLI link scheme could be a very helpful suggestion if somebody can look at it.
Thank you, Mr. Gavankar. It was a real pleasure talking to you and getting your insights.